you mangy dogs. Swab the decks and hoist the sails. The guns on board be needing some proper manning. Pieces of 8 and a fine wench on your arm. If your work be not too shoddy. Be careful not to flounder too badly, though, or you may have to dance the hempen jig as we see you to Davy Jones. Jeffy, my boy, on with the show.
Live streaming around the world via YouTube in conjunction this week with Zoom.com. That's the VoIP of choice this go-round, voice over internet protocol. And let's not forget OBS, Open Broadcasting Software. Welcome everybody to Pirate Radio Podcast, episode number 143, with special feature guest of the week, 32nd degree Freemason, Robert Sullivan IV. Before we bring Robert on board, I think it's probably best that we maybe let listeners in on who he is, in case they have not familiarized themselves with Robert and his work to this point. But he's a philosopher, historian, antiquarian, jurist, mystic, lay, theologian, radio, TV personality, writer, lawyer, and best-selling author of multiple books, including The Royal Arch of Enoch, The Impact of Masonic Ritual, Philosophy and Symbolism, Cinema Symbolism, 1 and 2, and I think he was working on 3 as well. That might be published. We'll see if it is or not here in just a moment. A Pact with the Devil, I believe, which, yes, was his first work of fiction, and so on and so forth. Lifelong resident of Baltimore, Maryland as well. So let's have him join us. I suppose that's enough of an introduction. Maybe save you from having to repeat yourself too much, Robert. I know you've been making the rounds here as of late in an awfully, pretty high-profile way. In fact, the reason why I even decided to reach out to you and see if we could put this together was because the fact we share something like 20 or maybe 25 friends in common via Facebook. So you've been pretty busy, though, over the last few years with your books and appearing on a multitude of podcasts and live streaming operations such as ours. Yes, indeed.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, my goodness, I've been doing radio shows on my books going all the way back to, it was January of 2013, so over 6 years now. And I've been doing it pretty steadily. I've taken some breaks here and there for a couple months. But I've done loads of radio shows, television shows, podcasts such as yours. And yeah, we have a lot of mutual friends, and I really appreciate you having me on. It's my pleasure to be here with you tonight on World Pirate Radio. Again, thanks for having me, and thanks for reaching out to me as well.
Oh, it's our pleasure as well. So really looking forward to where the conversation might take us this go round. Starting, I suppose, with the sort of jumping off point that would likely be the best here is, as we were discussing just briefly in the pre-show, this whole business as regarding piracy, of course, and the tie-in to Freemasonry. If in fact there was a Templar tie-in that I'm aware of course. I think we both know that. But anything more than that you could maybe add to the mix?
Yeah, there is people allege there's a nexus between the pirates and the Knights Templar. I'm a little more suspicious about it. I'm not as convinced of it, but it could be. The Templars are a interesting group of cast of characters. They come on. there's a lot of mystery surrounding them, even to this day. They come onto the scene as part of the Crusades. Their job is to protect the Holy Land for people going there for pilgrimages. And of course, they fight the Saracens and the Muslims, and they retake the Temple Mount eventually, and they Christianize it. And it is here that it is rumored very strongly that they discover something. Whatever this something is completely up to debate. It could be the Ark of the Covenant. It could be scrolls or lost wisdom. It could be material treasure. It could be esoteric wisdom. It could be the Holy Grail. It could be space alien technology. It's a wide range of things that argue that people come up with that they discovered, but they seem to have found something over there. At any rate, they come back to Europe, and this is where they kind of set up shop. And it's from here on out that you get the Freemasons or the stonemasons building these Gothic cathedrals all over Europe, with these sacred measurements, the Vesica Pisces, the golden ratio that they clearly are getting from the Templars. So they must have found something over there. And of course, in 1307, they're put out of business by the Pope and the King of France. But they pretty much go underground. A lot of them are arrested and, or burned at the stake. But a lot of them get away also. And this is where the tie-in with the pirates, with piracy comes along. And it's rumored, and it's, that they go to places like Spain, Portugal. But one place they definitely go to is Scotland. And they clearly have some sort of relationship with a place like, Rosslyn Chapel. And where this really kind of fact meets fiction here is, and this is what my research, and I talk about it, is it's odd because the first book that I wrote, and this was the Royal Arch of Enoch book, the Masonic ritual that I talk about, it's about this discovery of this treasure in the subterranean vault beneath the Holy Ground in Jerusalem. And in the early workings of the ritual, it's found by Knights Templar, by Roman Catholic Knights Templar. As the ritual exists today, the treasure vault is discovered by Jewish temple builders. But the original working of the ritual was Knights Templar, and it's exactly what it has to do with the construction of the Second Temple, going over to the Holy Land, discovering the subterranean treasure vault on where Solomon's Temple was on the Temple Mount, and and the whole ritual is very critical within Freemasonry, and it's so important. And when you look at the parallels with the ritual and history, you really do begin to wonder if this ritual isn't trying to relate some sort of legitimate lost history, that the Templars really did discover something, that they took it to Rosslyn Chapel. And this is what we were talking about in the pre-show. It's possible that they may have taken it to Oak Island. And the reason I say that is because like I said, it's all about a subterranean treasure vault. And of course, this is what you have on Oak Island, where they're trying to duplicate what they had discovered earlier. So, there is a nexus between the Freemasons and the Templars. I think that's pretty much irrefutable. It comes up later in the history of Freemasonry. When Masonry is founded, the Templar influence, the Templar crossover, I guess, as it were, doesn't come up to around 40 years or so. Officially, after Masonry is founded in 1717. But clearly Masonry, as the stone guilds in Europe existed, clearly they have some sort of nexus to the Templars. What that precise nexus is still somewhat of a mystery.
Indeed. So there's a multitude of various perspectives, of course, different theories that have been put forward. It's, I guess, up to each of us what to make of things, and a question of how far we are willing to investigate and, basically connect the dots, I suppose. Highly intriguing and most fascinating, as you say, indeed. So, and I've just actually had the captain contact me here in my earpiece, and he is quite impressed with the way you've laid things out there. It's probably one of the more detailed presentations that we've had presented to us here over the course of the 3+ years now that we've been putting this show and live stream together. So just one of the things that we ask of guests that join us here via the Robin Hood is that they offer some sort of pirate reference or story, and more of a formality, I suppose, than anything else. So, there's a whole number of different directions we could take things here, of course. First of all, I suppose it's important to acknowledge the nearly 10 people that we have now join us here via YouTube. Of course, we are running here over and through the Zoom VoIP, stands for Voice over Internet Protocol. It's not a Skype setup or deal this go around. Robert's been having technical problems with his computer and connection. Skype seeming to present him, with the biggest headache, and this and Zoom, of course, being a little more, proving to be a little more smoothly functioning and user friendly. So let me just say though, Robert, that I guess in acknowledging what is it, we have Joey Boomer, of course, here, and Joe Emanon, the two Pirate Joes, a couple of the regular gang, of course, Val from out of Estonia, Nethead, who has a t-shirt coming their way here quite shortly. I believe they'll have to check their email, and we have reached out to them, and just there is an email address that's been sent to them. So work with that, Nethead, and we look forward to having you receive your t-shirt in before too much time here, of course. So Sword Point 9, and scrolling up, I'm not sure who else we have here exactly, but a lot of comments and people putting their thoughts forward here in the YouTube chat area. Now, you don't have a YouTube account, apparently. You're not able to log in to the YouTube chat, but you're able to view it, I suppose, via the URL.
Well, I do have a YouTube channel.
Actually, well, that's right. In fact, I think we just recently may have subscribed to you, but you're not logged in at the moment. Is the problem? No. So you're not able to chat in real live time. You can follow the comments, so if you want, so feel free. But there's so much to say about you, of course. Too big football fan, we've noticed, and we have added a few of the pictures there from your Facebook to the slideshow. Of course, we've removed any of the more intimate, personal ones as per your request, but I guess it's Baltimore Colts, is that the deal?
No, that was the old football team. They left in whatever it was, 1983, and then from 1983 they went to Indianapolis, and then from 1983 to like 1996 there was no team, and that's when they got the Cleveland Browns from Art Modell, who was going to leave anyway, and Baltimore lured him in. And the Cleveland Browns became the Baltimore Ravens. And that was from 1996 to present. And they're still around. Yeah, they're pretty popular. And I follow it, from time to time. I've kind of lost a little bit of interest in it. But I still follow the Ravens. And the name, of course, was from Edgar Allan Poe. They ran a contest here back when the team got here as to name the team. And they gave you like three choices. I think one of them was the Bombers, and the other one I think was the Americans. I mean, and the Ravens won like 98% because of the Edgar Allan Poe reference, of course. And I mean, it's they've been here since 1996, and they've won 2 Super Bowls, so that's pretty good. And I've been to a couple games down there, and I think the photos that you're talking about on Facebook, I think they're like 10 years old now. It was like November of 2009 or so was when I was down there with those photos. But yeah, it's the Ravens now, and the Colts are now in Indianapolis. It's the Indianapolis Colts. So.
All right. Well, regarding Edgar Allan Poe, it's interesting. I was thinking about this in putting this week's show together. Of course, I did see the pictures you had there in place. I actually, here in Korea, used to work with a fellow from the States who claimed to be a distant relative of Mr. Poe's. So I'm not sure how far distantly related, but, his father was actually one of the first people to show up on the ground in Vietnam back in the day, and he seemed to, who knows, he himself might have been a Freemason. I have no idea, you know. So, but, and that's one of the things too. I don't want to get too sidetracked with this whole business until the second end of the show. We're going to let you have a break at the top of the hour. Just a 5-minute break is what you've requested. So, and I'll just kind of take the ball and run with it. You know, speaking of football, of course, but you know, up until that point, we'll address what we have taking place here, mostly in the comments section, but turn our focus mostly to movies. We've got about another, 40 minutes or so that we can work with here. Wizard of Oz. I think They Live is another movie that you've looked into and analyzed. We unfortunately didn't receive a copy of your book, so we're just working, to come up with the best, different examples that we can here. Let's see, V for Vendetta, those, as well as The Matrix, I think, are a couple of other pictures that you have incorporated into your what you've published book-wise. So just, what is it then about Hollywood and, the film, television industry? What are they trying to tell us?
Right. This is something that is really an interesting subject, and this is, like the incorporation of these esoteric themes and imagery into movies. There is lots of ways you can look at this thing. You can look at it as part of a nefarious agenda, which it could be. I think a lot of the symbolism has to do with, there is elements that you can definitely see sinister, but there's also elements where it doesn't point in that direction. A lot of it to me is akin to what I would describe as an architect incorporating or using sacred geometry in a building. It heightens the architecture, and it's the same thing with the symbolism. It heightens the movie. It presents an underlying storyline, and it also, on a subconscious level, helps convey different levels of understanding. If you're able to see it, you'll be able to understand the movie on a different level. And it's one of those things. One of the reasons why it really appeals to me is it's not one of those things where it's like with Bigfoot. Is it a guy in an ape suit? Or is it a UFO? Or is it the planet Venus, or is it just some sort of unidentified aircraft or a light reflection or something like that? With the movie symbolism, you can, if I point it out, you'll see it. It's something you can actually see tangible on screen and say, oh yeah, okay, now I understand that. That's one of the things that appeals to me, is you can actually see it. And I guess it's the same thing with the Masonic symbolism. When you understand its context, you can see it and you understand it. And you say, oh, okay, now I understand why the Washington Monument sits where it does and why our U.S. Capitol building has a dome on it. It's a study in symbolism. And it really, for me, is you mentioned it at the intro. You're absolutely right. I have 2 books out on it: Cinema Symbolism and Cinema Symbolism 2. I'm actually writing part 3 right now. And it started with the Royal Arch of Enoch book, really in earnest, with the last chapter of that book, because the one movie that was kind of the real kind of like the kick in the rear end with this was the National Treasure movie with Nick Cage. That movie is actually the Masonic ritual. National Treasure movie is actually a Freemasonic ritual that you're watching on the big screen. It's the Royal Arch of Enoch. It's the recovery or restoration of the Knights Templar Masonic treasure in a subterranean treasure vault. And that's exactly what the National Treasure movie is. And then you get into movies like you mentioned, like with The Matrix. The first Matrix movie is really the Gnostic theology on screen. That's really like the entire Gnostic theology presented on screen. You have, from a Gnostic standpoint, I mean, so much going on in that first movie that's there. But like I said, if you're not familiar with the tenets of Gnosticism, you'll miss it. Same thing with The Wizard of Oz. The guy who wrote the novel for The Wizard of Oz was L. Frank Baum, and he was a member of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy Society. And the Wizard of Oz is multi-layered. You have, and that's a great study also, because you have the political allegory going on, which is the Wizard of Oz is a political allegory from around 1895 to 1900. And then you have this other level of symbolism, which is like this, what I would call neo-Gnosticism, initiation into the mystery tradition. You will find this also echoed in Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. So, this was really something that just fascinated the hell out of me, was this, this popular culture, this very powerful medium, movies that were just, had so much underlying esoteric symbolism in it. And, it's one of those things that I just really love studying it. I'm a movie fan anyway. And it's really a challenge to me when, to see a movie and to try to dissect it, to take it apart, to see, what the greater context is. Am I dealing with an alchemical movie? Am I dealing with a secret society movie? Am I dealing with something that deals with astrology or the archetypes, or tarot, repetition? That's something these filmmakers love to use, is repetition, because it really does, and especially repetition that contradicts itself. I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, Guillermo del Toro. And this was something we were talking about with Twitter. I put up an image from The Shape of Water. He likes, in that movie, he's really becoming an expert with this. He likes, in The Shape of Water, for instance, he likes to have these repeating images, but they contradict themselves. It's very unique. I'm not sure. I remember seeing it. It's a great movie. If you haven't seen Shape of Water, I recommend it. But he does these little contradictory repetition, dualistic modalities almost. And I think the reason he's doing it is, I saw him in an interview. He says, this helps embed it in your subconscious mind, the story. So that's what these guys like to do. And they're really, some of them, quite honestly, are really expert at it. I mean, it's really astounding to me, the lengths these guys, when you're dealing with the guys like the Stanley Kubricks of the world, or the Darren Aronofskys, or the Toro, or Robert Zemeckis, the real lengths these guys will go to employ this imagery in their films. Like I said, it's a fascinating study. I've written 2 books about it. And the books were really an extension of the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch. And of course, they're called Cinema Symbolism, and the sequel, Cinema Symbolism 2. And then I'm writing the 3rd one right now, Cinema Symbolism 3. I mean, I know it's not that original, but hey, if it isn't broken, why fix it? So that's where I'm at. And like I said, it's just it's just something fascinating to me. If anyone in the chat room, if it's a movie I've seen, has any specific questions about any movie, I'll be happy to take it on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Orson Welles actually was another name that came to mind just while you were referring to the various directors that you've researched and investigated. He of course was very conscientious, to the point where I guess it was quite extremely neurotic almost. But that's part of the programming that the masses are end up receiving, of course, anytime they turn on their television sets or spend time in a movie theater, of course. So the chat is in fact heating up. There's a lot of activity over there, and I'm just going to actually address the comment that was made here by Joey Boomer, actually, in reference to the new Sabrina series, which my wife and I here, she's Korean, so sometimes it's a bit of a struggle to find things that we can share in common, as one might hopefully be able to imagine and appreciate, given the cultural differences and so forth. But what he says here is, just with respect to all the devil TV shows on now, Sabrina was just demonic. And the TV show about Parsons, that's Jack Parsons, of course, many times rituals right on the tube. So more or less echoing what you've just laid out there. But Sabrina, or the latest, I guess, I like to get around to downloading what I can here. Actually, that the show that was put together, I think it was courtesy of the director who put out the Titanic movie, of course. His name is escaping me right now, although I do think he himself is a Freemason as well, too, is he not?
Not to my knowledge, no. I think you're talking about James Cameron.
Yeah, that's right.
He is not, to my knowledge. There are Hollywood actors, and a lot of the founders of the movie studios were Freemasons. But Cameron is not one to my knowledge.
Jewish Freemasons as well too, which is quite interesting. I know I heard you address this matter in the past, of course. So is that just a coincidence? They would be Freemason, Jew. All the founders of Hollywood, all the big major studios were Jewish ethnically, I suppose, or from a religious standpoint, however it works.
Sure.
And then they also had their own membership in the fraternity.
Yeah, the Masonic fraternity, as long as you believe in a supreme being, you're able to join it. It doesn't allow it doesn't admit atheists or agnostics. So if you believe in a supreme being, you can join. So it's certainly open to Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists. As long as you believe in a supreme being, you can join. There is no religious requirement to join. It's just a belief in a supreme being. Whatever that being is, whatever you want to call it, is up to you. Freemasonry doesn't dictate the religion to its members. They consider that it's basically held out as a personal choice, a personal decision. The separate, the fact that the removal of the religious requirement comes out of the constitutions of the Freemasons. So as long as you believe in a supreme being, you can join. And yeah, a lot of the founders of the Hollywood studios were Masons. I wouldn't really necessarily read too much into that. A lot of the actors were as well. People like Clark Gable, Douglas Fairbanks, both of them, senior and junior. Oliver Hardy of Laurel and Hardy was. Stan Laurel was not. Bud Abbott of Abbott and Costello was, but
John Wayne
was. John Wayne, famous Freemason. So some are surprising. Richard Pryor, the comedian, was a big Freemason.
Yeah, we've added his picture to the slideshow, actually. So that was something that I forgot about. That he, I'm not sure what degree he held over the course of his life exactly, but I'm not sure how relevant that is even ultimately within the grander, bigger scope of things.
Yeah, you will. In order to hold the rank of Freemason, you have to have the third degree in the Blue Lodge.
Right.
So he's, if you're a Freemason, you're at least the third degree. The Scottish Rite, the two premier high degree bodies are the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, and the Scottish Rite ends at the 32nd. I don't know if he ever went up that high, and then the York Rite ends with the Knights Templar, of course, which we were talking about. And what's unique about the Templars is, and this does surprise some people, is as I was mentioning, the Freemasonry proper does not require a religious requirement. However, the Knights Templar do, and that makes it a bit of an anomaly. That requires Christianity. You have to have allegiance to Jesus Christ in order to join the Knights Templar. So that's at the end of the York Rite. So if you're not Christian, you can't join the Knights Templar, and that is a kind of anomaly within Freemasonry. All other Masonic bodies are pretty much deistic. The Knights Templar does have that specific religious requirement, so that's kind of unique.
Indeed, yes, that's something for people to definitely take note of. So let's just see what else we have here in the comment section. We'll save that one for a little later. One of the things I was thinking of here that you brought up just a moment or two ago, and I had actually made a note of as well, something I've been meaning to ask you. This is really important. You said now that here's the thing. Buddhists, I'm not too familiar with very many Buddhists, Freemasons, to tell you the truth. Maybe you are, but the thing is, within Buddhist philosophy, there's very little emphasis whatsoever, as far as I understand, on what would pertain to this, as in Freemasonry, the so-called, I guess, great architect of the universe sort of deal, but or God or Yahweh or Allah, whatever you want to call it, the source. I'm not sure if that would work as well. If that would get you into the lodge, but how many? I mean, with Buddhist Freemasons, have you come across too many?
No, I've never come across a single one. Right. I'm just using it as hyperbole. As long as you believe in a supreme being, as long as you believe in a supreme being, you can join. You definitely will find Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Christians. I guess those are the biggies, the Abrahamic faiths. Hinduism, of course, isn't. But as long as you believe in a supreme being, you can join. It's really excluding atheists and agnostics are the what they don't admit.
Absolutely, that is my understanding as well too. Just being the, I guess, profane lay person type individual that I am. So it's, running the show here, actually flying solo this go around because of our use, deployment of the Zoom VoIP, voice over internet protocol. So, I got my hands full here, as you can probably imagine, having to just produce the whole thing on the fly as we are doing it here. And I think, I'm not sure how many live streams have you actually done as compared to, let's say, the pre-recorded podcast type format approach?
I've done, I'd probably say the percentage breakdown would be from pre-record to live, probably 70-30. I'd say probably 70% pre-record, 30% live, I would say.
All right, fine. So fair enough. That's something pretty much what I would have expected as well too. So no surprise there that typically the pre-record is generally the format and approach of choice. But moving right along, we've got here actually a couple personalities. I was wondering if you've probably heard of these people: Freeman Fly, Jay Dyer, Michael Tessarian. They're all pretty much, along with yourself, of course, interested in this business of Hollywood symbolism, imagery, the occult or esoteric, encoding, use of archetypes and so forth in the, one might say, Jungian sense of the word. I know that's something that opens a lot of doors for you, of course, Jung being someone that you've looked into somewhat extensively from what I understand. But the question simply is, have you been in contact with any of these other people at all, or have they invited you onto their shows? What's the deal there exactly?
No, I've never been invited on to any of their shows, and to be honest, I'm not really too familiar with their research. I know the names, but I just do the movies as best I can and analyze them the way I see them. And like I said, I know their names, but I've never had any interaction with them. And like I said, I wouldn't want to critique them because I'm not familiar with them. I haven't read their books or anything like that. So, but I just do the research based on my experience and my research, which is what I rely on for analyzing the movies and the Masonic symbols.
Right. So I'm actually just going to take a look at what we have here once again in the chat. We're up to as many as almost a dozen people now joining us live here via YouTube. Things rolling along quite nicely, but I think probably trying to keep our focus here on the movies in particular, if we can. Just, They Live, once again, Wizard of Oz, The Matrix, and V for Vendetta is another, of course, too. But these aside, which we can get into at some point in more detail and depth, if you so wish, that I was going to ask you actually, what current or modern content has really captured your eye or caught your ear?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing Cinema Symbolism 3. Sure, I mean, I could talk about The Matrix or They Live, or any one of those. I mean, The Matrix is really, like I said, the Gnostic religion or the Gnostic theology. Movies that like that I've watched recently that I'm impressed with from a symbolic standpoint. I mean, I would definitely throw in The Shape of Water by Del Toro. I mean, his one before that, Crimson Peak, is overloaded with loads of esoteric imagery. What I like about Del Toro is, and he does this in both. I have to go back and watch Pan's Labyrinth. That's the one I want to watch next because that was one that he made in the mid 2000s. But the ones that I've watched of recent with him of his are Crimson Peak and Shape of Water. What I like that he does is with those is he puts some on the surface. Some of the symbolism he used is overt. You can see it. You really don't need you should be able to pick up on some of it. But he does very much so bury a lot of information in those movies. He likes to do a lot of things. He likes to homage and reference other movies. Crimson Peak is a frame-by-frame remake of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining from start to finish. It's a complete remake of the entire movie almost. That's interesting. The Shape of Water also has a lot of esoteric imagery. It has an alchemical storyline with it regarding transition. I like he references a couple movies in Shape of Water that are interesting. One of them is The Red Shoes by Powell and Pressburger. They were known as the Archers. That's an interesting movie. He references that movie a lot, and he uses the color red in reference to that movie. Another movie that, believe it or not, that turns up in The Shape of Water that he pays homage to is Hairspray. This was a movie, and I'm talking about the first one that came out in 1988. Not the musical that came out a few years ago. This is the John Waters movie. The Shape of Water is set in Baltimore in 1962, and it's the same time frame as Hairspray. And there's some interesting parallels going on with those two. So Del Toro is an interesting one to look at. Those two movies. The Matrix, again, this is a movie that I analyzed. I analyzed all three of them in the first movie book. I mean, this is kind of the Gnostic. I mean, I'll just get into it briefly. This is the Gnostic theology. You have the false reality, the alternative reality. Anytime you are dealing with pretty much an alternative reality, you are dealing with almost inevitably a Gnostic theme. The creation of the false world, as contrasted with the real world. This is an inherently Gnostic theme. And you have this in the Matrix with of course, the simulation is false, and then he escapes it to the real world. And of course, this echoes the philosophies of a Gnostic theologian named Valentinus, where he indicated that the false world was created by a character known as the Demiurge. And of course, you find this character turning up in the second Matrix movie. He's called the Architect, and he's the creator of the phony world. You'll find this echoed in a movie like Ready Player One. One of the symbols of the Demiurge is the egg. And of course, in Ready Player One, you have the false world, the Oasis. And of course, your whole purpose is trying to find the egg of Halliday, and of course, he would be the Demiurge, the creator of the false reality in Ready Player One. So anytime you're dealing with these alternative realities, you're inherently dealing with a Gnostic theme. And then you have the whole idea of Neo being this Christ-like savior figure, what you call the Gnostic Christ, whose sole purpose is to bring revelation, to bring epiphany to mankind, to wake them up out of their stasis, to bring them out of this false reality. One of the tip-offs of this is when you'll see Christ imagery all over the place in this. When Neo is finally, literally flushed down the toilet, and he goes down the sewer, and he's brought up into the Nebuchadnezzar, and he's lifted towards the light cruciform. That's a Christ reference. And then when he gets on board the deck or the bridge of the Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to see the nameplate of the ship, which is Mark 3:11. That's a reference to the biblical verse Mark 3:11, which I'm paraphrasing, talks about that demons will bow down to the chosen one. That's a Christ reference. And of course, this is a reference to the archons of the film. Of course, the Demiurge doesn't work alone. He's helped by a group of, angels and demons known as archons. And comparatively, this is the agents led by Smith in the Matrix movie. So you're dealing with a lot of Gnosticism proper. Inside the Matrix. Another movie that echoes this was a movie that came out a year earlier, which has the same Valentinian themes, which is called Dark City. That's another one that echoes this Gnosticism. They Live does as well. where you have the whole idea of the space aliens being like archons, keeping mankind in a perpetual stasis. One of the other Gnostic philosophers, he's a little complex. His name is Basilides, and what he said was to escape the false world, to escape the materialism, was to do nothing. It was negation. It was to absolutely do nothing. Essentially opening your eyes, you were a part of the world of the demiurge. Speaking, you were a part of the world of the demiurge. Thinking, you were a part of the world of the demiurge. And I like in They Live that the rebellion against the archons, the space aliens, the guy who leads is Roddy Piper. His name is Nada, of all things, which is Spanish for nothing. So that's echoing the Gnosticism of Basilides. That's very interesting. That's a unique symbolism there. So this is what when I analyze these movies, this is sort of the stuff that I'm looking for, and it's just really interesting to me. And like I said, during the first half hour, what really fascinates me with this is why I guess I'm so drawn to it is you can see it. Like I said, it's not like is it really Bigfoot, or is it just some guy dressed up? You can, if you read the books, you'll be able to see the symbolism. You'll get a greater understanding contextually as to what these movies are trying to tell you, on some esoteric level of some kind.
It's fascinating that you hit on these themes of gnosis and awakening, along with the Roddy Piper reference. He was, I was a big fan of his, actually, more so as a kid growing up in the '80s. Of course, the peak of WWF and E and that whole business with the Royal Rumbles and what have you. But actually, one of the things that he said, it was really interesting, just shortly before he so suddenly passed away, unfortunately, that They Live was a movie which was more of a documentary than a piece of or work of fiction. That's just one of the things that I thought I could respond to and kind of bounce back in your direction. At the same time, this, with respect to Gnosis and Awakening, the tie-in to Freemasonry, which we'd like to get more into in the second half of the this week's live stream, episode number 143 with 32nd degree Freemason, Baltimore, Maryland resident Robert Sullivan IV. That Buddhism, as we hit on earlier, it's quite interesting that there's a real major emphasis in the Buddhist tradition on the individual and the awakening within yourself, of course, much in the sense of the way I suppose Jesus talked about how the kingdom of heaven was within you. Something that so many people seem to either forget about or ignore. So that's something definitely I think worth reflecting upon. The demiurge, fascinating stuff, of course, too, which, I mean, would this, maybe you've already said this and just kind of went over my head, but the demiurge, to me, in many ways, is of the same substance and at the same level as to what Masons refer to as I guess it's the great architect of the universe. That is the demiurge, as far as I can tell. Am I off base there or missing something? What do you think?
You can definitely draw. Masons do not probably would want to equate the demiurge to the great architect, but I can definitely see a nexus to it. With the whole craftsman element there. But I think most Freemasons would not probably like that term. I think they would think of the great architect more as a spiritual entity than the demiurge would be. But I have to be honest with you. I mean, I could definitely see where that nexus would come in. Because certainly within Masonry, the deistic figure is referred to as the great architect of the universe, and of course that's what essentially the demiurge is. He's the craftsman of the material world, for lack of a better purpose. So yeah, I can definitely see a nexus there, but I think most Freemasons would like to think that they're not referring to the demiurge when he's being invoked in the Masonic Lodge. Although, I mean, this goes back to the, with Christianity from the get-go. Is Jesus an agent of the demiurge, or is he sent from the monad? The Christians wrestled with this and argued with the Gnostics over this, left and right. And I mean, there was this whole schism where, the God of the Old Testament, the God of Moses, the wrathful God. Well, I mean, many scholars thought, okay, well, this is the demiurge they're talking about. But then, when Christianity was taking off, they said, well, Christ comes from the God of Abraham, the God of Moses. They said, well, wait a minute, this is what some of the Gnostics said. They said, no. They said, the God of Abraham, the God of Moses is the demiurge. Jesus is coming from the spiritual body, this monad, what the Gnostics call the monad. So this is something that's been wrestled with throughout the ages. It's certainly interesting, but like I said, I could definitely within Masonry see a nexus to the demiurge. Although I don't think when that term was crafted, the great architect of the universe, I don't think they had the demiurge in mind when that was done. I think they were more going for a geometric spin, if anything, than a Gnostic demiurge. But I certainly can see a parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. As I think probably, more than a few people can. But I'm just doing my best right now to stay, to wait until the second half of this week's live stream to really jump into the Freemasonic end of the conversation. Anything more before we reach the top of the hour here that you'd like to address as far as Hollywood, television, movie industry is concerned? Let's not forget, there's many works of literature, of course, too, fiction, which is endless encoding takes place. But I know one of the things that you definitely like to talk about is this whole business, the tie-in relationship between Ian Fleming and Aleister Crowley. They had a correspondence of sorts between the two back in the day.
We worked for him.
Quite fascinating.
Yeah, Crowley worked for Fleming. It is an interesting. This definitely comes out of the world of you can't make this stuff up. Crowley during World War I and World War II was a double agent working for the British government, but he was holding himself out as a German spy. And in World War II, one of the people who worked in British counterintelligence was Ian Fleming, the guy who wrote the James Bond stories. And another guy in there with him was also Dennis Wheatley, who wrote The Devil Rides Out. That was made into a movie by, I think, Hammer in 1968. And Fleming, Crowley, worked with Fleming. And when you're dealing with the James Bond stories, you will decidedly see a very occult, esoteric influence on the James Bond stories, and they turn up in the movie. I mean, it's essentially, you'll see it. I mean, it's essentially the same story, just repeated over and over again. You have the whole idea. I mean, well, you have right off the bat with James Bond, you have the numeric designation of 007. That's, of course, John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's court astrologer and the guy who invented a system of magic known as Enochian. Dee was a spy master also. He worked under a guy named Sir Francis Walsingham, who was Queen Elizabeth's first spy master. And Fleming wanted to pay homage to Dee. So when the way the nexus is that when Dee would write to Queen Bess or Walsingham, a correspondent who would sign it 007. It was two circles with a line over top and a line down the side. And the symbol or sigil was designed to look like eyeglasses. It was symbolizing that he was her eyes in the field, or that the correspondence was for her eyes only. That's where that comes from. And Fleming wanted to pay homage to Dee with his spy master. So, of course, James Bond is 007-007. This is a reference to John Dee. And then, of course, within the Bond stories, I mean, you have these hermetic themes going on with the whole idea this comes out of the world of Rosicrucianism, the unification of the sun and moon. This has to do with alchemy as well, symbolic alchemy, more than actually transforming base metal into gold. Although you do have this in the James Bond stories with the story Goldfinger. Where you have the alchemist, or Goldfinger, AU, the chemical symbol for gold, is trying to increase the value of his gold supply, alchemically increase it financially, monetarily. So he's going to devalue the gold in Fort Knox. So, of course, for him, he has the philosopher's stone, which is the dirty nuclear device. And then the stories pretty much all follow the same storyline. It's the whole idea of the masculine meeting the sun meeting the moon, what the Rosicrucians call the alchemical wedding. And this is, of course, is the Bond girl meeting Bond, and then this is the same story over and over again. And he meets the Bond girl, they have sex, and then now he's spiritually equipped to go on and defeat this over-the-top villain, whether it's the alchemist or Goldfinger, whether it's the dragon Hugo Drax. That's a reference to St. George slaying the dragon, of course, very popular in British history. And then, of course, you have the Illuminati character, or Stavro Blofeld, who's using the East and West against each other. So you have these esoteric themes going on in the James Bond stories. And, of course, you have this decided influence upon Fleming from Crowley. And like I said, another character who moved in the same circle was Dennis Wheatley. And he puts Aleister Crowley in one of his novels. He wrote a story called The Devil Rides Out. And in that story is a black magician known as Mokata. If you ever watch the movie, he's played by Charles Gray. That's the Aleister Crowley analog, in that movie, Mokata. And this is turns up years later also phonetically. If you've ever seen the movie Rosemary's Baby, which was based on the novel by Ira Levin, the black magician has the same name. It's spelled a little differently, but it's pretty much phonetically the same. It's Mercado, Mercado. This is, again, a reference to Aleister Crowley, who was known to both Fleming and Dennis Wheatley. So, yeah, I mean, you have with Bond and with Fleming and with Wheatley, this Aleister Crowley influence. And like I said, this is something I talk about extensively in my first movie book, Cinema Symbolism. So if you want to learn more about it, by all means, check out that one book.
Your URL, contact information, and so forth, all your social media links can, of course, be found down in the show description area. People just need simply to scroll down and click on the link of their choice. And your books are, I think, made available through Kindle and so forth, are they not?
Yes, you can they're available in print edition and the Kindle ebook version. And you can get either one. They're on all the major online retailers: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, eBook Mall, Kobo. You can get the ebook. They're obviously a lot cheaper. And if you want the print edition, that's fine as well. You can get them on Amazon. There's links to buy them through my website, or you can just go to the website, Amazon or Barnes and Noble, just click in type in the book's name, it'll come up. So yeah, if you want the print edition, no problem. If you're a fan of the ebook, you can get that as well.
The author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I think his name was Ronald Dahl. He seems to, for whatever reason, figure into the milieu. As what we refer to here via the Robin Hood as 6 degrees of bacon. In this case, there is just one or two with respect to, in relation to him and Wheatley and Crowley and Fleming. I think, what can you just explain? Lay that out
he's
for
another
listeners?
one. Yeah, he's another one. He Dahl was buddy with these guys too. And I believe Dahl, everybody knows Ian Fleming for I guess just 2 points. One is you'll find a lot of hermetical, themes also in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The whole idea of the evil sorcerer or the evil wizard archetype with Willy Wonka. But what's interesting with Dahl is everybody knows Ian Fleming for the James Bond stories. Ian Fleming also wrote another novel. I think it was a kid's book called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And that was made into a movie, I think in the mid-1960s also. And the guy who wrote the screenplay for Chitty Chitty Bang Bang off the novel was Dahl, the guy who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Dahl was a strange character by all accounts. He he did not like at all when I believe the movie is called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This is the one with Gene Wilder. Dahl wanted someone else cast as Willy Wonka, and they didn't go for it because they wanted more of a well-known name. And Wilder at that time was very popular. I think he had just come off of Blazing Saddles, and he was about to go into Young Frankenstein with Mel Brooks, both of the Mel Brooks movies. And they wanted a name, and Gene Wilder, I thought, did a great job with it. But Dahl wanted someone else, and he renounced. I mean, he wanted nothing to do with the movie, and he wrote a sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I believe it's called Charlie and the Glass Elevator. And the movie, he did it, and the movie company wanted to buy it and make it into a movie, and he refused to sell it to him. And he did it out of spite because he was so upset with how Willy Wonka had come out. He wrote the sequel, and then he refused to sell the rights to a movie studio. If you haven't noticed, the movie has never been made into a movie. His novel has never been made into a movie. And then years later, and this happened right before he died, I believe it was in the early 90s, another one of his novels was made into a movie called The Witches. This starred Angelica Houston. And I believe that came out in 91, maybe 92, maybe 1990. I'd have to go look. But he didn't like that either. He didn't like the Witches, how it came out also. And one of the things he did, and this was right before he died, was when The Witches was released in England, he would actually drive around to movie theaters and honk his horn and yell at people who were buying tickets, telling them not to go see the movie. And scream at them, don't go buy tickets, don't support the movie. That's how upset he was over the theatrical version of his movie. So yeah, strange guy by any stretch. But yeah, I mean, I always thought that the Gene Wilder movie was pretty good. I always liked that. Certainly very dark, to say the least, but certainly strange guy, Roald Dahl.
And I would imagine there's a fair deal of esoteric coding and so forth, symbology and whatnot with the recent Johnny Depp version. You know, that probably is something that you address in your cinema and symbolism book number 3, but we'll leave that aside for now. Let's see, there was a few different points I was hoping to raise here with you. We've got once again, the comments are coming in fast and furious from all various fronts. So well, here's one. I'm not sure if this is something you can even address, but Joe Eminon in the Peanut Gallery wanting to hear about the relationship between Dr. Timothy Leary and Cary Grant. That's the first I've ever heard of that, and I think that's something probably that you don't, I'm guessing, don't have much knowledge of.
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Sure. So, but here's another interesting comment coming to us via Kaiser Schuff. That's our chief of security here. Well, unfortunately, because we are running this show segment, episode number 143 with 32nd degree Freemason and author, many other things as well too, let's not forget, Robert Sullivan IV. But what he would like to know, or rather he just makes the comment that Rowdy Roddy Piper was killed because of his, speaking out with respect to things such as making the claim that They Live was more of a documentary than a work of fiction. I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
I have no knowledge that he was murdered. That movie came out years ago, and I mean, I would be suspect of that because so many of those professional wrestlers died in their 40s and 50s. I mean, I have to believe this has to do with steroids. It's astounding. I mean, those wrestlers, I mean, I watched it too. I watched the WWF in the 1980s, with all those cast of characters. It's astounding how many of them are gone now. I mean, a lot of them did not last long. I mean, 40s, 50s. So, I have no knowledge that he was killed. My understanding was that he just died of a heart attack, and that's so, unfortunately, the fate that so many of these other professional wrestlers have met. So that's my understanding of it, at any rate.
Yeah, it's a good point. And something that people don't stop to think or talk about enough, of course, is the whole business of exactly what you say, the use of steroids and how it has impacted their health, not in a good way either, of course. I hate could start to get into a list of the number of wrestlers who have just
Oh, it's
died
crazy.
suddenly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or the roid rage. Chris Benoit, I think
Yeah.
that's one name that there's some funny business going on there, and he seems to have just snapped and completely lost it, and killed his wife, and I think there's a couple of kids, unfortunately, and very tragic, very sad. But that's one of the side effects supposedly of steroid use. So not really something that we need to get into any further at this point. In fact, what I think would be best for us to do is, because you would like to take a little break here, do that. You can just mute yourself and step away from the mic, maybe a bit of a bathroom break, grab a cup of coffee or whatever it is that you happen to do during your breaks, and drop back in when you can here. Just shoot me a message here on Zoom, or jump in at the appropriate time.
I'll just take a quick break, and I'll be back in a couple minutes.
We will dive as best we can headlong into the more Freemasonic end of things, focusing on that. So there's a lot of comments here, of course, once again, the YouTube chat area, and just comments that we've set aside here. So let's just give a bit of a shout out right now to, we have reached that magical number of 12, of course. It's something that as of late we've been working on reaching. So that's really great. 13 is always interesting too, of course, but anytime we can get up to around a dozen people who join us here live in the YouTube chat area, we're more than pleased, as is the captain, of course. So you are listening to episode number 143 of Pirate Radio Podcast. I'm your host, as always, the Robin Hood's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Unfortunately, we were not able to bring any co-host on board this go-around because of our use of the Zoom VoIP app, similar to Skype, but in this instance, anything 3 or more people in one room, and you're cut off after about 40 minutes is what our understanding of things here. So we've had to work around that a little bit. I am flying solo, not something I especially enjoy doing, to let listeners know what is the God's honest truth here. But it's always a challenge as well, let's not forget. So something that I will do my best to, just rise to the challenge and take things on here, taking the bull by both horns, as it were, and seeing where the conversation can lead us. Kaiser just chiming in here once again via the WPRPN Skype area. We have that open on a second computer off to the side here, stating that Piper was, I guess he's speculating that he was taken out, much as was Andrew Breitbart. Similar set of circumstances, indeed, very sudden, quite almost inexplicable, and little trace or evidence of any foul play that I can tell. I'm not sure how anyone could really prove that there was foul play afoot. We can always hypothesize, of course, but who's really to say? So we'll leave that to the audience out there in listener land to work on concluding themselves, whatever it is that they believe was the case. But we do encourage everyone, as always, to do your research. Make sure that the homework is is well underway, and that we take the time to investigate and apply critical thinking skills. Watch out for those logical fallacies if reason is something that you are committed to and care anything for. That is definitely something that people need to be on guard from, committing the ad hominem attacks or any number of different things, of course. So, which reminds me, we're hoping to have a show regarding this whole business of logical fallacies here at some point or another, hopefully before the end of the year. Of course, our schedule is getting quite booked up at the present moment. May, next week, let's not forget, we have, I think his name is Matt from the Free Thought Project. I didn't quite have the opportunity or time, really. I was almost able to get a hold of it, but just got sidetracked here, unfortunately. So, yeah, the representative and spokesperson via the Free Thought Project, a outfit which was banned off of Facebook a couple months ago, as a matter of fact. People that have been following the news as of late will know that further steps have been taken now by these Silicon Valley tyrants and technocratic despots to clamp down on and attack any form of opinion which resides outside the scope of what they deem to be politically correct. Very disturbing developments as of late. Stating for myself here personally that I may not agree with everything that we hear from the likes of Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson, who I personally find his tone to be quite shrill. So not really a fan of, not someone who spends a lot of time listening to the information he puts forward. Although I will read it if it appears in text form, but to listen to the guy, it's like chalk or fingernails running down the blackboard. That's just my personal reaction, unfortunately. So, and the Reverend Farrakhan as well too. So it's really quite sad and disturbing. Frankly, I've got nothing good to say about what we're seeing here right now with the huge clampdown and attack on free speech across the interwebs, limiting people's ability to communicate around the world.
Let me just jump in. I'm back now.
Sure. Yeah, you go ahead. Do you have any,
I agree with
regarding?
You.
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying. I'm not the biggest fan of some of those guys either, but
right.
They shouldn't be silenced. Just because they have a contradictory opinion. I'm not a big fan of Alex Jones, but I wouldn't ban him either.
Isn't it interesting, Robert, to think about how many of these people too now who are waging war on free speech are the very same individuals and personalities who were around back throughout the 60s and so forth, who were all in support of free speech up until the point where they find their way into the establishment and various social institutions and so forth, and suddenly they start to want to change their tune. So some major, real hypocrisy there, as far as
I agree.
Can say.
No, I agree with you.
Really sad. So, all right. Well, we're going to turn our focus now to the more Freemasonic end of things. We can always, of course, circle back and do a bit of a callback to earlier content or talking points that we had brought up and addressed. But right now, let's jump into all things, Freemasonry, including the fact that you yourself are a fourth generation, or actually fourth generation Robert Sullivan. But how far back does your family lineage go with respect to Masonry?
Right. I can trace it back to some of my great grandfathers and grandfathers were Masons. A couple of them were past masters of their lodge. That's a term given to people who run their lodge for a year and then step down. When you run a lodge, when the guy runs the lodge for the year, is called the worshipful master, and the terms only last a year. So once you're done, you then get the title of past master. So I've had a couple of those in my family tree. It skipped over my father. He didn't join, no interest. I was interested in it as a kid growing up. I was always interested in, mysteries, cryptozoology, UFOs, ghosts, supernatural. This was something always just appealed to me for whatever reason. And certainly with Freemasonry, it was always sort of this, kind of mystical, shrouded in mystery and, symbolism. And this just appealed to me. I remember always one of the things that shows that I watched growing up a kid was In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And I remember they did the one on Jack the Ripper with the Freemasons. I remember thought, oh, that's really interesting, and again, it was just something that appealed to me. When it really came along at the right point in time in my life. I had just gotten out of college. I just graduated college, and it was right before I went to law school. And the opportunity presented itself for me to join, and I took it. I took it, and I joined the Blue Lodge right here in Baltimore, Amicable St. John's Lodge number 25. And then a couple of years later, I joined the Scottish Rite, becoming a 32nd. That's really as high as you can go. There is a 33rd degree, but that's by invitation only. You cannot solicit that. Really, the key degree in the Scottish Rite, though, is the 13th, the Royal Arch of Enoch. That's really the pinnacle of the Scottish Rite. Same with the York Rite. It's the 7th degree in the York Rite, kind of the pinnacle also. I come from a line of Maryland Masons, and I was real happy to be to be able to join. I consider it a privilege. I'm honored and humbled by it. And like I said, I know for a fact that my Masonic membership, without it, I'll put it to you like this, without it, I don't think these books would exist. Certainly not the movie books and the Royal Arch of Enoch. They definitely would not exist. And my work of fiction was born out of kind of writing them, kind of the creative process almost. So my membership in Freemasonry definitely spawned 4 books as it is right now, and with more on the way. And it was just something that was fascinating to me, just researching the symbolism and the history. One of the things, I'll just wrap up on this, one of the things that I think is very appealing for me, and I think for a lot of people, is Freemasonry just covers such a wide breadth of subject matters. I mean, it really is. I mean, the symbolism, the religious aspect. I mean, you're dealing with themes of Christianity, Judaism, Islam. You're dealing with mystery schools. You're dealing with astrology, even astrotheology. You're dealing with a lot of crossover of history, philosophy. So it really does cover a lot of ground when you're talking about Freemasonry. And I think I always found that interesting. I think that's one of the things that appealed to me.
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy and what was the name of the title of Unexplained Mysteries, or that's
In Search Of.
In Search Of. There you go. So that was, what a great series that was, and of course a big loss, his passing just a number of years ago. But as William S. Burroughs so famously put it, I'm sure many have realized this along the way too, that essentially we're all here to go. So, but something I'd like to say here, I think this is really important, because we are going to get more into the criticism of Masonry just in a few moments here. And I think one way that we could refer to you, I suppose, without hopefully insulting you too badly, because I think you can take it, of course, not a problem. But a Masonic apologist. We had a Catholic apologist, Michael Jones, join us just a couple weeks ago. So, and it'd be great to have him back again at some point. But that being the case, whether you accept this,
I've been called that before. Sure. I don't really, I've heard that before.
Okay, but the thing is that it's interesting, because you've also been criticized by Masons to a certain extent for maybe letting a little too much out of the bag, as it were, or releasing too many of the more esoteric, air quotes now, secrets.
Sure.
from within Masonry, to which, as far as I can understand, I think we're on the same page here. That largely, rather than being a secret society, it is a society with secrets. And the bottom line, the real issue is, you take you swear your vows, as it were, take the pledge and so forth. That it's a question of your word and your honor, not to release or let let it be known more widely to the world. Once again, let the cat out of the bag as far as what the hand grips are and the passwords and that sort of thing. So, well, what the criticism that you have received on the part of fellow Masons? How do they see things?
Right. You're right. I mean, you can write as a Mason. You can write Masonic books. You can write books about Masonic symbolism and Masonic history and Masonic philosophy, and even the ritual, because the ritual is of in itself symbolic. That's allowed. What they frown upon is giving up the passwords and the tokens and the grips. These are what are known as signs of recognition. This is how the Mason, we tell each other apart. Essentially, that's the kind of stuff they don't want you being put out there. I do not do that. I do not give away any of the grips or any of that stuff or the hand signs or anything like that. So the book is okay on that aspect. Most Masons who read it like it. I've been invited to, and I have been invited to Masonic lodges to lecture on the book. In fact, if you go to my website and you go to the contact page, you'll see a picture of me lecturing a few years ago at a lodge up in New England. So no, most Masons, I've been invited to, participate in magazine articles, magazine interviews. So most Masons like it. There have been some that do not. And the criticism or the critique or what they don't like is, it's funny because when I was writing the book, the one thing I thought was going to be was going to be not well received was the whole comparative religion study between Masonry and Christianity and the sun and the stars, the astrotheological Neoplatonic elements, I suppose. I thought that would be more critical. It wasn't. The criticism is that the Book of Enoch, the thesis of the book is, the thesis of the Royal Arch of Enoch is that this ritual, as it was being developed in Paris, France in the 1740s, 1750s, as part of high degree Freemasonry, what was known at the time as what's called the rite of perfection. As this rite was being cultivated, they were incorporating elements of the lost Book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, the Ethiopian text, into this ritual, or being influenced by it when developing this ritual, which should not be happening because from around the 2nd, 3rd century to 1793, 1773, I'd have to go look, the Book of Enoch was lost to history. Yet as early as 1740, 1750, these guys knew about it. So that's the thesis of the book. And I get into the symbolism and the history and why the ritual is so important. What is controversial and what was not received was the whole idea of Enoch receiving this wisdom from essentially a coterie of demons or fallen angels, and transferring this wisdom or concealing this wisdom during the flood of Noah for the benefit of mankind. And as it was preserved by the Masons and as it's preserved in the Masonic ritual, that's the criticism of it. If you read the Old Testament, the knowledge that Enoch is trying to preserve is considered evil. This is what the God of the Old Testament is trying to eradicate with the flood of Noah. In the Book of Enoch, it's considered divine. So you have this split there. So there is this controversy. I was on years ago with a guy who was a Freemason. I won't mention the guy's name, but he started screaming at me. And he just lost it about halfway through the interview. And at the time, unfortunately, I was kind of a novice, still doing radio. I had only been doing radio at the time for maybe six months or so. And now I would just hang up. I mean, I would just disconnect and say, have a nice life and just move on. But unfortunately, I tried to kind of hang in there and tried to take the high road and defend it a little bit. as best I could, but he was just going berserk. So that's been kind of the criticism, or I guess the point that's not been well liked. But it's few and far between. Most Masons like the book. The book has pretty much been well received, but I guess there's an exception to every rule. And again, when it comes to writing books, the truth of the matter is that there will never be unanimous liking across the board. I mean, there will always be some guy who doesn't like it for whatever reason. That comes with the territory. I mean, if you're not prepared for a negative review on Amazon, you shouldn't do it, because that will inevitably come no matter what.
Absolutely. And, you know, this business of releasing or having too many secrets be known to the wider profane world, as it were, it's kind of ironic too. Well, it's more of a matter of principle. Just to emphasize this point, as far as I can tell, it makes total sense, because you know, your people are expected to be men and women of their word, so why not? And on top of that, we're living in the day and age now where so much of this information, a quick DuckDuckGo search, and you can find whatever it is you're looking for anyways, as far as these matters are concerned. So that's yeah, that's just, I don't know, it's kind of a non-issue in some ways, and provided that you, as you said, did not unpack or let the cat out of the bag once again with respect to these matters, then it shouldn't be a problem at all. The Book of Enoch, though, was it not one of the famous books of the Bible that was removed from the Catholic Bible, or the Catholic Church had a bit of a problem with it, did they not?
Yeah, it's not part of the Bible. It is considered holy scripture to the Christian Church Fathers. It's considered a holy text. Enoch is, of course, mentioned in Genesis in the Old Testament, and the Book of Enoch. There's actually 3 books of Enoch. There's 1, 2, and 3. The first one is the one that's probably the most famous, and it's controversial. It definitely has controversy in it, because it has to do with him. To make a long story short, he goes into the afterlife, or into this heavenly, this heavenly abode, and he acts as a sort of a lawyer for these cast off angels known as the Watchers. And he serves as an intermediary, an attorney almost, trying to get these guys back into the good graces of the Almighty. And of course, they've fallen out. I mean, of course, because this is kind of more well known, is they've come down to Earth and they've mated with human women, producing this group of the giants called the Nephilim. And they've fallen into disfavor. While Enoch is hanging out with these guys, they teach him things. These guys are teachers. They possess wisdom, and Enoch learns of this. And this, he brings this in the Masonic lore, in the Masonic legend. He brings this knowledge back to Earth, and it's this knowledge that ultimately becomes mathematics and the 7 liberal arts and sciences. And I can't remember off the top of my head. He's either the grandfather or great grandfather of Noah. And again, he catches wind that the God of the Old Testament is going to eradicate mankind. And destroy everything with the flood. So Enoch devises, and this is in the Masonic literature. You can read this yourself. You can probably find this online. You find this in Masonic Monitors by T.S. Webb, people like that. Enoch decides to trick the Almighty, so he builds this subterranean treasure vault. And down in this vault, he inscribes this wisdom that he's learned on 2 pillars. And in between the 2 pillars, he places the name of God on a golden delta. This is what's known as the Tetragrammaton. And he preserves this wisdom to survive the flood of Noah, and it does. And this is what's preserved in the Masonic ritual. It basically makes the Masons kind of these as almost like a de facto possessors of this forbidden yet legitimate wisdom. So this is the controversial part of it. You're right, it is left out of the Bible. I didn't mean to pivot too far off. But if you read the Book of Enoch, you will find quotes in the Book of Enoch. Jesus quotes the Book of Enoch. Some of the apostles quote the Book of Enoch. So it is controversial, but you will find the Book of Enoch's fingerprints all over the New Testament, and I guess that's part of the controversy as well. Excuse me.
Yeah, national treasure actually is one of the talking points that we have here. Something I know you are familiar with, and I'm pretty sure I've written about quite extensively over the course of your literary career here. So, and there is a tie-in to what you just referenced, I believe, as far as the.
Well,
Go ahead.
no. This is a good talking point because this kind of ties the movie stuff to the Masonic stuff, and this. You're absolutely right. I think I mentioned it back in the first hour. The Masonic ritual. I'll just get into this quickly. The Masonic ritual, the 13th degree, the Royal Arch of Enoch, is the discovery on the Temple Mount of the subterranean treasure vault. They spring a trap door. It's where Solomon's temple was standing. That's been destroyed, and they're about ready to build the second temple, which is known as the Temple of Zorobabel. And as they're clearing the rubble away, they discover in the original ritual, it's the Templars who discovered this. In the ritual as it is today, it's Jewish temple builders. They're clearing the rubble away, and they discover this trap door, and they spring it. And beneath 9 archways, they find the Vault of Enoch, which is this subterranean treasure vault, the 2 pillars, and the Tetragrammaton, the name of God. This is the name of God is lost. This ties into the Blue Lodge, the 3rd degree ritual. If you go back in time, the 3rd degree ritual hovers around a guy named Hiram Abiff building Solomon's temple, and he possesses the same thing. It's called the Tetragrammaton. It's the name of God, and these 3 fellowcrafts are trying to extract it from him. He won't give it up, and they kill him. And this is what's called the lost word of a master mason. The word is lost in the Blue Lodge. But you fast forward to the high degrees, they discover this lost word, this name of God, and by pronouncing it correctly, you can restore this wisdom on these 2 Enochic pillars, as it were. So it's the discovery of this Masonic Templar treasure vault. This is exactly what is going on in the National Treasure movies, and this is one of your big tip-offs that this movies are concealing this esoteric imagery. If you ever watched the first National Treasure, I mean, it's the ritual. It's the discovery of this Masonic Knights Templar treasure vault. In it, it's a lot of gold, but there is sacred knowledge in there. There are, sacred scrolls from, I believe they identified from the Library of Alexandria. I mean, where is it? Well, it's the subterranean treasure vault beneath the Holy Ground. It's a church in New York City. I believe it's Trinity Church. This is a reference to a man named DeWitt Clinton, who was a former mayor of New York City and governor of New York State, who is absolutely critical in understanding Royal Arch Freemasonry in the United States and the bi-party political system that we have today between Republicans and Democrats. Basically, DeWitt Clinton invented that. DeWitt Clinton is the inventor of the 2-party political system that exists to this day. He is someone who has been completely written out of our history books. And one of my motivations for writing the Royal Arch of Enoch was to sort of restore him to Freemason. I mean, he is absolutely critical within Freemasonry, and he is a central figure in our history, in American history. And sadly, he has been completely forgotten about. And one of my motivations for writing the Royal Arch of Enoch was to restore him back to history, to get into all what he did. Because without him and without understanding him and his affiliation with Royal Arch Freemasonry, without that, with it, well, I'll put it to you like this: with it, you'll understand American history a lot more easily, and you understand why things are good or bad the way they are today because of DeWitt Clinton.
DeWitt Clinton, former mayor. I'm not sure was it Baltimore? Did you say?
No, New York City.
Oh, well, how about that? Well, we'll definitely encourage our listeners to look into that. Any relation to Bill Clinton, perhaps?
No, no relation.
Okay.
No, not that I'm aware. I mean, maybe distantly, but nothing direct or anything like that.
Speaking of family lineages and so forth, we got a lot going on here. Kaiser Schaff, of course, talking about his Germanic roots. He himself being a genuine, bona fide Teutonic Knight, believe it or not. So which it's interesting because I'm not sure if they and the Knights Templar historically really got along too well. I think there might have been a few dust-ups between the two groups that to the point where maybe even resentment exists and still resides today. So we could leave that aside for now. If you want to address that, that's fine. But I mean, there's so many comments that are coming in here right now. We only have a limited amount of time. Of course, our guest, 32nd degree Freemason, Baltimore, Maryland resident, Robert Sullivan IV. One of the comments that is coming in at this particular moment is via Nethead, who wants to know, and I'm pretty sure you're not a huge fan of the author, Dan Brown, but that the lost symbol, it's kind of similar in some ways, I guess, with the esoteric, Freemasonic tie-in, as was National Treasure. What are your thoughts on his Brown's literary works, and in particular the lost symbol?
I've never read The Lost Symbol. I kind of hear it's kind of silly. I do address the Da Vinci Code in the Royal when I was writing Royal Arch of Enoch. What happened was, when I was writing it, I was writing about all this dense Masonic history, Masonic symbolism, Masonic ritual, and I wanted to end the Royal Arch of Enoch. I wanted to bring it up to modern day. So this is what, like I said, the kernel that grew the movie books was in the last chapter of Royal Arch. I wanted to talk about sort of what I would call Masonic movies. And this is why I analyzed the National Treasure movie, and I analyzed National Treasure 2. I got into the King Arthur, the Excalibur movie, because that's a solar allegory, and so much of Masonry revolves around solar imagery. The one movie that I analyzed was Da Vinci Code, and this parallels a lot of the Royal Arch symbolism as well, because I'll try to get into it as briefly as I can. Is the entire the crux of the ritual is the restoration of knowledge. It's the possession of the name of God that you pronounce correctly, and then you can restore wisdom, again, inscribed on these two pillars. And I'll just get into it quickly. If you ever watch Da Vinci Code, pay attention, because anytime wisdom is needed, and I analyze it in the movie, anytime information is needed, the number 13 appears on screen in some form or fashion. So that's a clear Masonic reference. I mean, even in National Treasure Part 2, the Book of Secrets, when they need information about the president's desk, the Resolute's desk, the one character says, "Oh, that's in my book." He said, "That's chapter 13." Again, this is a Royal Arch of Enoch reference to this ritual, the restoration of knowledge. And you'll find it in the Da Vinci Code as well. I mean, I remember the one scene where they needed information, and it's on the Mona Lisa, and the Mona Lisa is kept in room 13. And then what's critical in Royal Arch Masonry is the keystone. Keystone symbolism is critical in Royal Arch Masonry. It's a long story. We don't have time to get into it, but it ties into why Pennsylvania is known as the Keystone State. And if you ever watch Da Vinci Code, there's a scene when the keystone, which has the little piece of information in it, the knowledge is in the back of the bank vault, or in the truck. They're transporting it. And the guy flashes his Rolex watch, and the time on his watch is 1:12. Add 1 + 12 to get 13. Again, another Royal Arch reference. And there's a couple more in there. They're escaping me right now. I haven't looked in the book in a while. But no, I've never read or had anything to do with Lost Symbol. I've never read any of his books. I did analyze the Da Vinci Code movie just because it had a lot of Royal Arch Masonic symbolism in it beneath the surface. But I'm not familiar with Lost Symbol. But if you're interested in Da Vinci Code, I break that one down in the Royal Arch book.
All right, very good. One of the talking points that we have here, and that we had brought up earlier, deals with the criticism that one of the criticisms Freemasonry as an institution, I suppose you would say, in some respects, has had to deal with and endure over the years. There's a great quote from actually, I thought it was Winston Churchill. Actually, well, it is indeed. I'm sure you're familiar with it, though. It's quite famous. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt, he, of course, being the founder of the Illuminati, to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Bella Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman. The worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development of envious malevolence. I like that little catchphrase there. Envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It goes on a little further, of course, too. But, well, it's interesting because Churchill himself was a Mason, yet at the same time he's talking about this grand conspiracy, as it were, something to which envious malevolence and impossible equality we find very much in play currently, it seems, with the social justice warrior, cultural Marxist crowd.
I agree.
They're really pushing that in a big way, it seems. So I don't know. Right below this, too, we have this business, and I know you got a few things to say about the man, Albert Pike, and his his 3 World War, the letter that he quite famously produced, so the story goes, and the quote that really just the catchphrase that jumps.
The Albert Pike letter is fake. That's fake.
Okay, unleash the atheists and nihilists was what that was the big kind of thing that jumped out at me. But yeah, some people do say it's fake. Some people say the protocols, the learned elders of Zion is fake. So I don't know really what to make of it. But just I'll let you address this in a second. But I'm going to add something just into the mix here as well, because she would probably not be too pleased if I didn't bring it up. But this comes to us via Svetlana, who is currently out there, a big supporter of what we produce here, twice a week, of course. Tuesday nights we have the World Pirate Radio News segment, and same time here as always, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 on the East Coast, the Friday night feature guest spot. So, but what she's asking is whether how the Masons back globalism, what their end game is. Similar to the Illuminati and Zionists, they have their own Messiah prophecy and end time goals. This is something I've never heard of before. Freemasonry, there is some, they have their own Messiah and end time goals. Is that what's going on? Is that true?
No.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before, but it'd be interesting to see what she says.
Yeah, I've been involved with Masonry for 20 years, and again, this is just conspiracy, really kind of nonsense. Unfortunately, since Masonry came onto the map, it's had its critics, and there's always, since day one, there's been anti-Masonry. I can say that, it is influential. It certainly, is involved in society. Certainly a lot of movers and shakers have been a member of the Masonic Lodge. That's irrefutable. And I think it's kind of like working in reverse. I mean, this is how it is with me, is people join the Masonic Lodges and are taken by the values of it. And then they try to impress these values upon society. I don't think it's like, it's a person joins it and they like what they're hearing. So, it's like I do it too. I mean, when I write my books, I incorporate codes and symbols and different themes, are buried all in my books. And, when it comes to Masonry, people, when it came to the founding of this country, they turned to Masonry to forge a nation around. They didn't want a monarchy. They didn't want a Vatican. So they used the democratic egalitarian principles of Masonry to literally found a country around. The Churchill quote is interesting because he was a Freemason. Of course, he's referring to Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati. And again, you will find Illuminati fingerprints, again, on the foundation of the United States of America. DeWitt Clinton was the guy who was rumored to be head of the American division of the Illuminati. You may have heard this term before, called the Colombian Illuminati. That's the American side of it. The guy who ran that allegedly was DeWitt Clinton. And again, he's the guy who was really pulling the strings behind the curtain. I've been involved with Masonry. The Illuminati pretty much is defunct, but I totally agree with a lot of their doctrines have survived and seem to be in play, especially today, with globalism, social engineering, things like that. I think that's kind of irrefutable. I've been involved with Masonry for over 20 years now, and I have never, ever encountered any sort of Masonic, I can't remember the term you used,
Well,
Messiah
grand. Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
or
End
anything
game.
like that.
End
I
game.
mean, I've never been exposed to it in any way, shape, or form. If it's there, I've never seen it, but I would be very, very skeptical of it.
Sure. What I'm not sure how much this ties in, but the great work, with the great the architect of the universe is, ritual magicians throughout the years, and I think this is something that very much does interest you, given your dedication to these various esoteric and hermetic matters, but. The great work, as it's known. What does that? Is that from Eliphas Levi? I think I know you've talked about him in the past. Is how far back does that term go exactly, as far as you can gather, and does it relate to Masonry at all?
Well, right. Eliphas Levi is he wrote a book called Transcendental Magic, or the rituals and dogma of high degree magic. The book, I have the book here. I've read it. It's very nebulous. It's almost like a history. I mean, it's more philosophical than it is anything else. But the book is important because it influenced Albert Pike, who wrote Morals and Dogma. In fact, he quotes several sections of it verbatim. A lot of the book is repeated verbatim in Morals and Dogma, his book of the Scottish Rite. Lavi talks about astral light and the great work and this alchemical transition. It's somewhat nebulous as to what he's talking about. It seems to be more of an alchemical transition. He talks a lot about alchemy and developing the philosopher's stones, things like that. But it's significant because it does influence Albert Pike, who, of course, wrote Morals and Dogma of the Scottish Rite. And it's good I bring up Pike again real quick because, the letter predicting 3 world wars, this has been, from my understanding, has been completely debunked. It's totally fake. I don't know anybody who believes that anymore. He gets more into trouble with a term he uses in Morals and Dogma. He uses the term Lucifer to describe the planet Venus. And that's been a source of consternation throughout the years. People have turned to that one little line in an 800-page book as, complete irrefutable proof that Freemasons worship the devil. And unfortunately, the Morals and Dogma of the Scottish Rite is not a book about Masonry. It's actually a book about comparative religion. It's actually the first book written about comparative religion published in the United States. What he does in the book is he talks about Masonic symbolism, and then he goes back in time and says, okay, well, the Masons used this symbol, and it was used in ancient religion to represent this, and to the Zoroastrians it meant this, and to the Mithrians it meant this, and to the Egyptians it meant that, and to the Phoenicians it meant that. And then he gets into this one point about Lucifer, and what he's using it is it's a comparative word to relate to the planet Venus. That's what he's talking about. He says, is it Lucifer that bears the light, doubt it not. And what he's saying is it Venus that heralds the sunrise? Because oftentimes Venus appears overhead in the eastern sky right before the sun comes up. And what he's trying to say is he's basically using Lucifer to compare it to the planet Venus. And the reason why Venus associates with Lucifer is, of course, the fallen angel, false light. The sun is the real light. And that's why it associates with Venus. It's false light. It's the light that brings the true light, that announces the true light, which is, of course, the sun. If he used the word Venus, no one would care about this. If he said, is it Venus that heralds the light, doubt it not, no one would care about this. But Pike was a bit of a showman, and he knew this was going to be controversial, and he didn't want to be forgotten. So, of course, he uses the word Lucifer in his book. It's a term that I've kicked around in the Royal Arch of Enoch book. Other Masonic thinkers have talked about it as well, such as Manly P. Hall, I think, uses in one of his books. But it's really a term to be applied with to the planet Venus is what he's talking about, at least in Morals and Dogma.
It's interesting, too, the way so many people want to confuse, or I think the word is equivocate, Lucifer with Satan. And I just don't think that's the case at all. If you look at the evolution or just the origins of each of those figures, as it were, very abstract mythological entities, I suppose, at best, frankly. So yeah, Manly P. Hall, that was one of the names and one of the talking points I was going to actually bring up here as we close in on the top of the hour. Robert has generously provided us here, or allowed us to speak to him over the past 2 hours. That's pretty much where we're going to reach the end of the road. So a few more comments hopefully we'll be able to have addressed and see what he has to say in response to these things. But Manly P. Hall, are you familiar with the circumstances under which he was found deceased?
No, I know he lived to be very old, but I do not know the circumstances of how he was deceased. I think he lived to be around 91 or so. So, I mean, he was hung around there for quite some time. But I'm not familiar with what his cause of death was. I know he was a Freemason. He became, I believe, a 32nd at some point in time during his life. I cannot recall if he became a 33rd, but I know he became a Freemason and joined the Scottish Rite. But I've read all his books, but I'm not familiar with how he died or anything like that.
Quite mysterious from what I understand, in that there were several days which had passed until he was discovered, I believe, at his own residence, as you say, at a very ripe age, but that there were actually, his body had decomposed so badly that maggots were actually found to be crawling on his deceased corpse. So some people have speculated, though, and I'm sure you're on board with the fact that conspiracies, they do occur from time to time. It's just a question of, when are they actually present and when are they not? So, but yeah, food for thought. Speaking of which, here's an important question with respect to the way Masonry does function. I'm not sure if this has ever been something where you found yourself having to make a decision, but in the event that you had either a fellow brother or just a lay person from the ranks of the profane, you had a choice of who to promote. What would your decision be exactly?
Well, right. I've never been presented with that, situation, but I would probably promote the most qualified is what I would think I would do. But, I mean, certainly within the Masonic Lodge, if you have brothers, I mean, you will meet a whole host of people within the Masonic Lodge, and we do favors for each other. It's funny you mentioned it. I just got an email last night from a Freemason, and he said I need some help here. He said I went to your webpage. He said I see you're a lawyer. He said I just had someone break a non-disclosure with me. He said I need some legal help. Can you help me? And I bandied some emails back and forth between the guy. I did it, of course. I didn't charge him or anything. I wouldn't do that. But I mean, I steered him in the right direction. In the end, I couldn't help him. He's in another state than I am, and I'm not barred in the state that he was in. But I pointed him in the right direction. I asked him some questions. I said, tell me about this. Where are you located? And he got right back to me. And I finally said, here's what I recommend doing. This is what I would recommend. Do this, and I presume he did it. So, we are friends. I mean, it is a fraternity. We do work together. I was in a fraternity house at college. I went to Gettysburg College, and I still keep in touch with a lot of my brothers from Gettysburg College who were in my fraternity house. So I mean, you join the Masons. I mean, you're brothers. You're part of a brotherhood. And if one reaches out to you for help or wants a question answered, you answer it as I would do with someone else. If I had a question about something and the guy was a Mason, and I didn't know, I'd ask them myself. So we do reach out to each other with questions, and we do, work together. As far as promoting someone in a job, like I said, I've never been presented with that scenario. I usually go with the most qualified. The people who help me with my books, my editors and my graphic designer are all women, so they're not Freemasons, of course. I've met other lawyers who are Masons. I've met Masons in all sorts of walks of life, and they reach out to me, and I reach out to them, and that's what I guess one of the benefits of being part of a fraternity.
Exactly. Not doing anything more than what you would with a friend as well too, someone who reaches out, a friend in need.
Sure.
And it's important, I think, for all of us to go that extra mile and cultivate greater generosity. We can be pretty selfish creatures as it were, all too often, of course. So but it's important, of course, for people to there's this, one of the things that actually came up just prior to us going live here. I was scrambling, we got once again the two computers that we're running with here, so it's kind of tricky to share information, get files transferred, and that sort of thing. But you had, I think it was a picture out of, was it Oxford or one of the better known schools in Britain, of course, and there was, I think it was Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice, three times great, I think, as he's known, basically. But there was a fountain, a statue. Was it Oxford or which school was it in Britain? Because you did attend. Speaking of your post-secondary experience, that was one of the places that you spent a little time at.
Yeah, I actually spent my junior year abroad at college, at St. Catherine's College, Oxford University, studying European history and philosophy. The image I sent you is actually an image from the Royal Arch of Enoch book. Part of the Masonic lore regarding the Royal Arch of Enoch, we talked about the discovery of this subterranean treasure vault. The one thing that I left out is, of course, that this knowledge has already been restored to mankind. And the Masons basically are rediscovering it. And in the Masonic lore, there's two characters who breach the vault and pronounce the name of God correctly and restore the information encoded on the pillars back to mankind. The first is Pythagoras, who pronounces the name of God, the mathematician, of course, and pronounces the name of God correctly and then restores the mathematical pillar back to mankind. The other character is this god coming out of Hellenistic Egypt, known as Hermes Trismegistus. He pronounces the name of God and restores the liberal arts and sciences back to mankind. If you got a symbolic eye, and I get into this in the book, Hermes is constantly floating around colleges and libraries. And it's a symbol of higher education. It's a symbol of the seven liberal arts and sciences coming out of this Masonic lore. And if you actually go into Christ Church at Oxford, one of the schools there, when you go into the Great Tom Quad, you'll find this giant fountain there. And of course, there's no Christian iconography. It's the pagan god Hermes, and it's symbolizing the restoration. This is complete Masonic symbolism. Oxford University is festooned with it. I mean, even the part of the Thames River is renamed the Isis River. That's an homage to the goddess Isis, the Virgin Mother of the Sun. The dome on the Bodleian Library designates it as sun worship. And of course, the sun god is Apollo. And this is why the Oxford University Lodge for college students and university students is the Apollo Temple. And of course, you go into Christ Church Quad, you won't find any Christian iconography. It's Hermes symbolizing the restoration of the seven liberal arts and sciences. This again is a fascinating study in symbolism. And if you're interested in that, by all means, check out my first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, because I go into it in much greater detail in that book.
Isn't it interesting, too, the way that this ancient Egyptian goddess Isis, the name has been hijacked just in recent years by this rogue terrorist organization? Speaking, you were talking earlier about reversing symbols and so forth. That I think we find that very much present in this instance and example of total subversion. So I suppose, I'm not sure what your thoughts are, but that's some pretty dark and black magic I would say. I'm not sure what your thoughts are. Do you think it's just a coincidence they came up with that name? Oh, I'm sorry. I was muted during that last little exchange there. What I was getting at there, just to revisit and to resurmise, Isis, the what you mentioned earlier, is an ancient Egyptian goddess that was recently hijacked and subverted by this rogue terrorist organization. Do you think that's just a coincidence, or is there some real black magic at play?
No, I think it's just a coincidence. I don't see anything to that.
How about that? So, and Svetlana, going on here, it's really important, though, I guess, to get this question out here right at the tail end of things, that the Noahide laws, which I'm not sure you know much about personally, I wouldn't imagine, perhaps, but that with Bush Sr. signing off and Trump recently too, she seems to think, as do some people, with respect to the whole conspiracy end of things, that there's a little more going on here than what some people might realize, but that she thinks that there's a Freemasonic hand behind this whole business here. So people just have to check out what we see here in the chat area, of course, as to what her thoughts are, and take it from there. It's something definitely worth looking into. So I guess finally the last point or question here is, you hear so often Freemasonry is not a religion, but I mean, come on, grand worshipful masters meeting in a temple, conferring all these rights and degrees upon people. That it's really, to me, it's quite odd that, why is it that Masons insist that what they're a part of, their fraternity, does not constitute a religion?
It isn't a religion. It's a it incorporates, I would say, some religious imagery, but it's not. There's no evoking of any specific. That's why it's generic, because there's no, they don't mention Yahweh or Allah or Jesus. That's all left at the door. They just invoke the great architect as a symbol of deity. Like I said, you have to believe in a supreme being to join, but it's not like a church congregation or anything like that. You could be sitting next to a Christian, could be sitting next to a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu or something like that. This is why it doesn't go over well with some conservative Christian groups, for this exact reason. It clearly, I don't consider it a religion at all, but I mean, it definitely incorporates religious symbolism. I mean, regarding the building of Solomon's temple, things like that, things out of the Bible. But no, I've never seen it. I mean, I've never considered it to be a religion. I don't think it is. Whatever your own religion is, stays yourself. I've never heard anyone say my religion is Freemasonry. You're a Christian, or you're a Jew, or you're a deist, or you're a Muslim. But like I said, it's part of anti-Masonry. I know where it comes from, but I've never considered Masonry to be a religion, and I wouldn't hold it out as such.
Some critics, including, I suppose, the fundamentalist Christians, or I'm not sure where it comes from exactly, but they claim that it's actually a form of crypto-Judaism. Hitler, I know, and the Nazis were that was their kind of view with respect to Masonry back in the day. So, to which I think there was a lot of persecution, that took place during the time of the Third Reich. So, once again, just something to reflect upon and to look into further, obviously. But 33rd degree, this is what you've got coming to you next, I suppose. You're waiting for a call one day, or how does that work exactly?
It's completely voluntary. It's completely by invitation only. I don't know. I mean, I don't sit around holding my breath waiting for it.
Yeah.
We'll just wait and see, pretty much.
Yeah. So Ordo ab Chao, of course, being the motto of the 33rd degree. That's quite something. You're familiar with the term? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it has to do with the founding of the Scottish Rite. It's the motto of the Scottish Rite. It means order out of chaos. Up until 1801, before the Scottish Rite was founded, these high degrees they were very disorganized. Some lodges recognized them, some did not. Some states recognized them, some did not. So the founding of the Scottish Rite was to bring order out of chaos and unify all these degrees under one house, and to bring it all together and to make it recognized. That's where the term originates from.
All right, Robert, it's been a real ride here, of course, and there's a lot of other talking points that we could hit on and bring up, but we'll have to save that hopefully for another time. We'll maybe get into some other areas if you choose to join us here once again at some future point, maybe in 2020. For example, we're quite busy and booked here via Pirate Radio Podcast, but I've had a lot of fun here. It's really great actually managing to make your virtual acquaintance. We know it's quite late out there right now in Baltimore, so we're not going to bother requesting your presence in the after show, the Rogues Gallery end of things, simply because you've been pretty generous with your time here already, of course. But just to let listeners know, of course, if they do scroll down and check out the show description area that we have here on YouTube, they can easily find all of your social media links, contact information, any further questions. I'm assuming you're quite, it seems very approachable and easily able to respond to their questions or inquiries. Any upcoming events that you have in store, and what else would you recommend as far as people being able to, just get in touch with you or get a hold of one of your books?
Right. Well, thank you for starters for having me on Pirate Radio. I appreciate it. I thought the show was tremendous, and I want to thank you for inviting me on. If you're interested in me or my books, just go to my website. My website is my name. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV. So my website is www.robertwsullivan, and the letter I, the letter V for the fourth, iv.com, robertwsullivaniv.com. It's a pretty easy website to navigate. There are links to buy the books. You can get the print edition or the ebook form. There are links to follow me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You can do all that. There's I update the site routinely regarding upcoming radio shows such as this one that'll be there. Upcoming appearances that I'll be doing. So by all means, check it out. Information about me. So again, just go to the website. It's very easy to navigate. And again, it's links to all my social media. You can find me on Twitter. There's a Facebook fan page you can like. www.robertwsullivaniv.com. And again, thank you for having me on. And, like I said, if you're interested, just go to the site. It's pretty easy to navigate. www.robertwsullivaniv.com.
All right. Well, that's much appreciated, and definitely the way to do things if people, once again, are interested in making any further contact. But thank you very much for dropping by the Robin Hood, this episode 143. We're going to let you make your way on out the door now, or you can just simply mute yourself and just stand by, maybe grab a coffee or whatever you do as we wind things down here, of course. So just basically like to remind people that, well, first of all, hoping they enjoyed this week's live stream. Just an amazing number of topics that we covered, and a lot of various areas and issues that could be addressed here as well at some future date. So hopefully we'll have a chance to get Robert to drop by, maybe back, say, in 2020. Of course, we do have a pretty full schedule here with our latest slate of bookings. Coming up next week, the Free Thought Project, organization that has, along with the likes of Alex Jones and the Reverend Farrakhan and any number of other thought criminals that happen to be out there around the world, seems to be a growing number and increasing list really is what was happening here. It's really quite disturbing, as I believe we talked about earlier in the show, of course. So it's completely unacceptable, of course, the decisions that are made. The way, I mean, look at what's happening with us on Facebook. Regular listeners will know that there's constant efforts to basically impede our ability to share content. So that's a real issue. I think just trust me on this, folks, friends, foes, and fellow pirate mateys, when I say there's a lot more going on here behind the scenes than what most of you probably have any idea. We'll just leave things there for the time being. But yeah, very much looking forward to having the Free Thought Project join us next week. The following week actually is open right now, believe it or not. We're thinking of maybe producing our latest installment of the Minds World Indie Music Showcase 5.0. We'll see how that all plays out. Of course, if anyone has a guest or can present to us someone who they think would make a good fit for that particular date, the 17th of May, then by all means, pirate1radio@gmail.com or pirate1radio@protonmail.com. That's the way you can quite easily reach us. Robert Morningstar is going to be rounding things off here on the 24th. We very much look forward to his return, of course. And let's not forget as well, if you're hoping to support the show and the wider WPRPN network, you can start by simply liking, commenting, and sharing the content that we put out there in our social media, where you're able to find us appearing and not being actively suppressed or shadow banned or throttled down, unfortunately. And let's also add to that, well, YouTube, we're looking for more subscribers. We need to get up to 1,000 subscribers. It's not easy given the limited resources we have here on hand, a strictly voluntary operation. But if you can subscribe to us on YouTube and remember to hit the notification button, that's really important. And see to it that the notification button does stay in place. Then we can build things up to the point where we're able to monetize once again. And hopefully YouTube doesn't shift the goalposts around on us yet once again. Be sure to scroll down in the show description area. Check out those social media links, both for our latest guest here this week, Robert Sullivan IV, as well as new links that we have up there, including BitChute and Subscribestar. We're hoping to shift our focus, attention, energy away from Patreon and get behind what they have to offer over on Subscribestar. Speaking of just the endless censorship, the purging, and it's outright discrimination, really, of the worst sort that we see taking place here now, the total and utter disregard for free speech. So that is a philosophical quandary, I suppose, to say the least. It's a major, they've really breached, they've just, it's simply gone too far and crossed the line long ago. It's only continues to get worse. Each of us has to vote with our computer mice, of course, and speak with what we have at our disposal, including the money that we have in our wallets and the ability to vote with our feet, too. Let's not forget. So, on that note, I think we've pretty much run the gamut here. We're going to head off to the after show. If there's anyone out there in the YouTube chat area who'd like to join us, we can make that happen via Skype. Once again, I'm assuming Robert is going to be probably heading off to bed. It is, I think it's about a little after 1 o'clock there now, 1 a.m. in the East Coast. So, but what a show once again. Very much look forward to this upcoming week with the Free Thought Project. In the meantime, let's just remind listeners that until we meet again out on the high digital seas, on behalf of Captain Long John Sinclair and all the rest of the crew here on the Robin Hood, I'm your host as always, the show's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder.
I know.
There we be. Having carefully looked over each of our navigation panel instruments,
Checking every level, switch, dial, cable, knob, and pulley, by all accounts and indications, we indeed see it's time, once again, to drop anchor inside Mystic Bay.
draw an end to yet another week of World Pirate Radio Live.
Remember,
If you're looking for a little more animated online action,
keep in mind, we've likely got yet another great free-flowing Rogues Gallery after show.
coming up for the next hour in one of our more premium exclusive and remote digital underground online pirate hideaways. Also, if you yourself have a new,
Novel, intriguing, or otherwise underreported idea, unique individual, or pressing item in mind, be sure to either drop us a line directly over on WPRPN.com or fire us a quick email
via pirateoneradio@gmail.com.
We're always open to exploring fresh creative suggestions, intriguing guest ideas, cutting-edge discussion topics, and captivating themes. WPRPN.com network subdomain links are also now available. Great for artists, musicians, podcasters, bloggers, social media personalities,
Or pretty much just any old land lover
looking to boost their online visibility, presence, and reach.
Basic personal profile accounts can be launched for just $60 per year.
Staking your claim now helps not only strengthen you and the network, we're also looking out for the little guy. That's right, folks. As much as half of all WPRPN's profits are redirected right back into the hands of the people who really need it most. Community charity. After all, we are the Robin Hood.
You can further embark on your own personal pirate journey by either liking, sharing,
Commenting on, subscribing to, or just following us via virtually any mainstream social media platform, including Twitter, Facebook, Google+, or Minds.com. So don't forget to become engaged. Until we meet again out on the high digital seas, I'm your host as always, the ship's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Tally-ho.